that restructuring of our external debts could be coming to a close. Now, let's take it back a few steps. In May 2023, Ghana received approval for a $3 billion extended credit facility with the IMF, which came with some 600 million US dollars disbursement. Now, the second disbursement had stalled as Ghana's bilateral creditors were unable to agree on a deal for the restructuring of almost $6 billion the country owes to them. The IMF requires an agreement with these creditors before it releases another $600 million into the country. Of course, a disbursement would be a positive development because not only would the funds help the Ghana city, but it would also signal that Ghana is close to an arrangement with its foreign lenders that will take it on the long path to regaining its debt credibility. Now, the failure to receive these funds could point to a reverse situation. This morning, the Daily Graphic carries this story on the front page. Restructuring external debt, two economists predict growth. Now, the agreement to restructure the country's 5.4 billion US dollar debt owed to external creditors will help to free up some resources for the government to engage in economic activities that will propel growth in the year 2024. Of course, the Ministry of Finance also put out a statement which reads as follows. I'll be skimming through so we can get the essence of said release. It's dated the 12th of January 2024. Ghana reaches agreement with official creditors on debt treatment under the G20 Common Framework. Okay, now the government of the Republic of Ghana announces that it has reached an agreement with its official creditors under the G20 Common Framework on a comprehensive debt treatment beyond the debt service suspension initiative following the successful completion of the Domestic Debt Exchange Program, DDEP, which I'm sure we all recall, in 2023. This development constitutes a significant positive step towards restoring Ghana's long-term debt sustainability. The government of Ghana commends the support and cooperation of its official creditors in reaching this agreement, which demonstrates a mutual commitment to restoring debt sustainability in line with the IMF program targets. Now, I'm moving along with that statement. The terms of the agreed debt treatment are expected to be formalized in a memorandum of understanding between Ghana and official creditors. And that goes on and on. And we're expanding this conversation, of course, as we look to what the implications of this will be for the city. It's a very important step, I beg your pardon, in ensuring that the city is strong in the year 2024. Dr. Edu Owusu-Sarkodie is a development economist at the University of Ghana, and he joins us right about now. Good morning to you, Doc. Hope you're well. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Helen, and thanks for having me. Good morning to our listeners.
Now, the Daily Graphic has what some would call good news, if you will, restructuring of external debts. It appears that an agreement of some sort has been reached, and if everything goes according to government's plan, by the end of February 2024, that second tranche of money should be reaching us. Is that timeline one that is more realistic than the ones that have come before?
Well, I normally wouldn't want to speak so much about the timeline, but I understand where many Ghanaians are coming from because our economy was in difficulties. You take it to IMF, so everything must be punctual. You must be able to revive the economy. But the reason I said I wouldn't place so much premium on the timeline is that it's about negotiations.
Okay.
And when you are negotiating with somebody, and you don't know, the person's intent. You don't know how fast the person wants to move. You wouldn't want to put times on certain things. So this is the whole picture. The whole idea is to bring debt to a sustainable path. to about 55% of GDP. That is the outlook that we want to achieve. The government was successful with the domestic one, as you rightly read out, because it is much easier to do the domestic. I'm trying to answer your question in this context. So
sure.
It's easier to do the domestic. That is why the IMF wanted the government to start with the domestic, because it's much easier. Now, when you go to the external, it's a bit difficult and it's complicated because the citizens are not Ghanaian citizens.
That's
and therefore, you must demonstrate to them why you need that help. If it's Ghanaian citizens, it's because of loyalty, because of patriotism, because of, you can even appeal to their emotions. We are all Ghanaian. If you don't help us, the economy will collapse, etc., etc. But
like we saw during the DDEP time, so that we're all in this together. We must tighten our belts, burden share. That's right.
Exactly. So you see how I'm answering your question.
Right.
So it's easier for the domestic. The external is a bit complicated. It becomes more complicated when it comes to the commercial. That's why, according to you, initial timelines have been missed, etc., etc. And I wouldn't want to be specific about the next timeline because it's about negotiation. It's much difficult from the external front. But there is hope. The hope is that we have reached an agreement. The one we reached with them before the release of the first tranche was an assurance.
Okay.
An assurance is not commitment. An assurance is that maybe, okay, you do go ahead with the IMF program. I'll think about it, or I'll consider it. Now there is an official agreement that, yes, I said in the past that I'll consider it, and I have considered it. And so I will have an agreement with Ghana to restructure the external debt, beginning with the bilaterals. And everything we are talking about now is just one component of the external debt, which is the bilaterals. And so the agreement, we have reached an agreement that, yes, they will help us restructure the bilateral component of the external debt. And that details of that restructuring will be held between Ghana and the individual countries. Remember that we contracted the loans not in the name of G20, but in the name of the individual countries. So
that's right.
The G20 are just 20 great countries that have agreed that within a certain common framework, if any country is in difficulties, especially low-income countries are in difficulties and they come to us, there's this package that will give them, it's more like the HEPIC one. There's this package that will give them to reduce their interest payment or defer the payment or reduce the principal, as we call it in haircut. And that framework. And Ghana has applied to that framework. And so, but we must remember that the loans that we took were not in the name of G20. The loans were taken in individual countries' name. So it's like Ghana versus China, Ghana versus Italy, Ghana versus US, Ghana versus UK. It is not contest. So as we speak, G20 Secretariat has given us the agreement that all members have agreed that they will restructure our debt. So it's a commitment on them. The details of the individual restructuring will be held between Ghana and the individual countries, and that Ghana will have different MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, with different countries, all the different countries, because the loans were contracted differently under different circumstances in the names of all the different countries. That is where we stand. And the bilaterals, all bilaterals put together, we are considering about 5 billion that we want to restructure. Then from there, we go to the multilaterals and then the commercials. If the bilaterals are successful, it's much easier for the multilaterals. Because we have IMF and the World Bank and AFDB, who are willing to help us. The most difficult will be the commercial. I think our commercial debt is around 13 billion. Something to be correct, it's about $13 billion.
Okay.
That one is a bit complicated and it's a bit difficult. But I think that if we are through with the bilaterals, we go to the multilaterals, the commercials will help us achieve that. So it's good news. Like you said, it will stabilize the city.
Right.
It is not only going to release the 600 million second tranche, it is also going to unlock additional funding of 300 million from the World Bank, making $900 million plus additional $250 million. All amounts are in dollars. Additional $250 million from the IMF themselves to help, create funding. Government has already created this fund, but we are yet to receive funding, money into the fund, which we call the Financial Stability Fund. The idea is that many institutions, financial institutions, were hit.
That's right.
They were affected. And so this fund, the Financial Stability Fund, is going to help them revive their financial stance. And so we are looking for an amount of $1.15 billion, which will help stabilize the city for a long time, and then also give us extra funding to finance government's developmental projects. Priorities have been given to agric in the budget. Priorities have been given to agric, trade, sports, tourism, and a few others. So I think these are the areas that the monies will go into.
Right. Now, for external creditors, will they be looking at the factors that have contributed to Ghana's inability, or the economy's inability, to meet its external debt obligations, or its debt obligations in totality? Will they be looking at those factors? Is that something external creditors will be paying attention to?
Well, so let's take this scenario. When since January 2022, the Ghana government has not been able to raise sovereign bonds from the Eurobond market, and the reasons they have given, in fact, it's the same reasons that led to the downgrading of our economy, that we are unable to raise internal revenue to service our debt. That's the key phrase or clause that they put around our neck, that we are unable. And so if that's your question, then I must say that the bilaterals and the external creditors have looked at our situation, and they said that yes, our debt is on an unsustainable way. We have to help them. We have to help Ghana. Deliberate attempt to help them get out of this trap, the debt trap. Now, in helping us, they are also looking at, that's why we needed an IMF program to unlock this G20 debt relief, because it needed to be an IMF program to have their mercy. And they are confident that because we have already secured an IMF program, IMF will help us, the document will help us, meet some of the targets and get ourselves out of the mess. The first review by the IMF shows satisfactory. They are very satisfied with our progress towards recovery in terms of suspending our interest payments, suspending the principal payment, in terms of our ability to raise internal revenue. A number of taxes were introduced, and on today's TV3 is talking about those taxes on VAT.
That's right.
So you might have talked about it already.
That's right.
And so these steps have been taken by the government to ensure what we call fiscal consolidation. And fiscal consolidation is when you want to narrow the gap between revenue and expenditure, so that you can narrow or you can slow down borrowing, because about 48% of our debt is from budget deficit. So if you narrow the budget deficit, you are narrowing about 48% debt accumulation in the country, which is good. So these steps have been taken by the government, and I think that the external creditors are very satisfied with several issues. One, government's completion of the domestic debt exchange. Two, the steps towards fiscal consolidation. And I must say that 75% of the fiscal consolidation has already been achieved in the year 2023 alone. I repeat, 75% of the fiscal consolidation for the 3-year period of the IMF program, the 75 has already been achieved in the year 2023 alone, because in the year 2023, government reduced its expenditure and at the same time they increased revenue. And so they have brought down the budget deficit. And they did this because they know that in an election year, the government would have to spend. So they made sure that they what we call front-loaded. They front-load large fiscal consolidation in the year 2023 alone, which has been achieved. Today, Ghana is recording a positive primary balance. And it means that we have slowed down borrowing when we have positive primary balance. And so these are all indicators that they have looked at. And the outlook is positive. And so that is why they have committed to treating our external debt for us. And the answer to your question is that yes, they have looked at all those indicators, and that has made them commit to the treatment of the external, the bilaterals especially, the bilateral external debt for us to get some relief for the next one. I think we are looking at a minimum of debt relief of about $10 billion in the whole external, for the entire external debt restructuring, a minimum of $10 billion, which is not small money. If we're able to go through this in the next 3 years, we will have at least some relief, and then our economy will be back on track. Now, I must also say that Ghana has done so well. In fact, the IMF officials were so impressed with our meeting our targets, especially with the economic growth.
But not to slight tackle you, though, this has come at some great cost to the Ghanaian people.
Yes,
that's right.
And so that's why I was making the point.
Sure.
Usually, when you do debt exchange, whether it's domestic or external, countries like Jamaica, who were successful, and in Argentina in the time past, who were successful in the implementation of the debt exchange, their GDP grew at just around 1%, 1.5%. So if you recall, the government's projection has always been around 1.5%, just 0.5 percentage points above the norm. But Ghana today is doing around 3%, and which is a feat that we have achieved, and it's good for our economy. Now, coming back to the cost, the first cost of debt exchange program is the GDP.
That's right.
Because Ghana, we calculate just as convention with many countries, we calculate our GDP using the expenditure approach. So individuals' consumption, like you and me, if you go and buy food, watch it, buy television, it is about 76% of GDP. So the individual consumption, which you call the household consumption expenditure, accounts for more than 70% of Ghana's GDP. And so when you introduce taxes or increase tariffs and it reduces their disposable income, it will reduce their consumption. And so GDP, about more than 70% of GDP has been affected through individuals' consumption. Then you come to the industries, which we call the firms. Firms expenditure around 15 or 18% of GDP. If you introduce more taxes to the firms, the companies, it will reduce their investment and GDP will be suffered. The last one, or the third one, is government expenditure. And in the last 2 years, government has reduced its expenditure. So that aspect of GDP has also been affected. And the last one is the net export, which wasn't greatly affected. But 4 out of the 5 components, 3 out of the 4 components have been greatly affected. That's why GDP was sacrificed. But something is happening in Ghana that I think economists are yet to explain. That we are expecting around 1%, 1.5%. Why are we doing 3% and all that? And I think that the first explanation will be attributed to the extractive sector.
Okay.
Our extractive sector was projected to grow at 12%. And so that is, impacting on the overall GDP. Agri sector has been prioritized by the government. And so agri is also expected to do well for us to push in and push up the GDP growth rate. So the individuals have paid some huge price.
That's right.
Individuals like you and myself, we have paid price. There's utility tariffs were increased. I think they were among the first things that were done as far as the fiscal consolidation was.
That's correct.
Concerned. That the IMF said, they indicated that Ghanaians were not paying economic price, and therefore we should be made to pay the economic price. When we say economic price, we mean that price that you pay, which will neither make the company make losses nor make supernormal profits, they will just make normal profits. So if EG was making losses, Ghana Water wasn't making enough profit. They were making less profit as expected. And so IMF says that let Ghanaians pay the economic price, the right tariffs. And that's why those tariffs were adjusted. And it's a cost to Ghanaians, and that we cannot run away from it. It is a burden share scenario that you painted. Second one is the introduction of new taxes. And all these taxes are hinged on the fiscal consolidation, which is to narrow the gap between revenue and expenditure. So in as much as government is trying to cut down its expenditure, it is also trying to raise revenue to narrow the gap between revenue and expenditure. And it is expected in every IMF program, the first pillar in the IMF program is fiscal consolidation. And anytime you talk about fiscal consolidation, you should expect the introduction of new taxes. However, I am of the first belief that, yes, the government is expected to raise taxes, but there are other areas that the government can look at because those areas are growing and they are performing better.
That's right.
Like the telcos and like the natural resources. And so I'll be more happier if these areas were taxed more and then maybe less taxes were input on other sectors. That is my only worry or scenario or recommendation to government, that yes, we have to raise revenue, we have to raise tax revenue, but we must look at the areas that are doing well, tax them more, and then come and tax less on other areas. And so, yeah, this is the cost that we all have to burden share. The other one, the other scenario is that for the first time in many years, the IMF have been deliberate about social intervention programs, and you wouldn't see this in many IMF programs. In fact, before the 1990s, they were not interested in poverty. They were not interested in inequality. All they would tell you to do is increase tax, do this, reform here, reform there. Whether it impacts on the poor or not, they have no idea. But after writings by Stiglitz and Jeffrey Sachs and other development economists that bash the IMF, they have changed their modus operandi. That after the 1990s, they are now considering, they are moved from dictating to recommendation. So in the past, they would dictate to you specifically what you must do. Today, they are just recommending what you must do. And they are also adding safety nets, which is being preached by the IMF and the World Bank. These Bretton Woods institutions in the past were not interested in safety nets. Today, they are very much interested in protecting the poor. And so you can see that a number of government social intervention programs have been protected already. You can even add free SHS to it.
I was going to say, are you referring to things like free SHS, which we have seen still remains intact? We hear from government quite often there will be no scrapping, for example, of free SHS, and even thoughts of a review have seen a lot of pushback.
Yes. In fact, in the strict context of social intervention document, you will not find free SHS. But I will add it for a reason that it protects the poor. So let's take the list.
Okay.
First on the list is LEAP, the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty. This is the direct cash transfer to the extremely poor people. We are talking about 2 to 3 million Ghanaians who are extremely poor. Extremely poor means whatever income they generate can only buy them food. That's all.
Right.
They cannot buy any other thing apart from food. That's why we say they are extremely poor. That's about 3 million Ghanaians. Today, the government is supporting them. More than 1.5 million Ghanaians, close to 2 million Ghanaians are beneficiaries. Of course, there are still others remaining, but this is good. It's better than none. So the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty, IMF document encourages the government to intensify that program, provide more funding for it. And in fact, government has already increased the funding. Then they will come to the capitation grant and school feeding. It has its own challenges, but it has not been cancelled.
That's right.
Government has tried to resolve all the challenges around it. And the next one is the NHIS, the health insurance scheme, though has challenges, but of course, these challenges must be resolved. It has not been cancelled. The training allowances, you can even add a NAPCO if it's still in existence. But
I believe NAPCO ended with some arrears to the NAPCO trainees. So that has ended.
The government should pay their arrears.
Absolutely.
To relieve them. And then free SHS, within the context of providing a relief for the poor, I will add it to the social intervention programs because of the savings that people make. Now, without free SHS, people will be paying fees like school just reopened. People will be looking for like 2,000, 3,000 cedis as school fees, but today they are not. It becomes a saving in their pocket, and you can talk about the others that have been rolled out. Even with the utility tariffs, lifeline consumers have been exempted from that. The new VAT on electricity, lifeline consumers have been exempted, and these are all measures to protect the poor. And IMF knows that when you increase taxes, people will be affected, but they want the poor to be protected as much as possible. And that has been done, and that is being done by the government. And I think that we must commend the IMF and the government for actually taking steps to protect the poor and the vulnerable.
So you would agree that we keep these measures, the trainee allowance, the LEAP, the school feeding. You say these are interventions that must be maintained to protect the poor.
Yes, in these difficult times, yes, it must be maintained. I will be surprised if they scrap any of them, because we are all going through difficulties. Everybody admits, the government has admitted it, the global economy is not in good shape. And so we all admit that we are going through difficulties. A number of taxes have been introduced. It will impact on our disposable income. It will impact on firms' investment. We all admit. But, some people, all fingers are not the same. Some people are better off. So if there are more tax and the money is being used to provide relief for the less privileged, I think it's in the right direction. And so in these difficult times, in the next 1 year or 2 years, none of these social interventions should be touched. We should maintain them. If you are calling for a review, I am not against a review.
Right.
Any review which will not overburden the very poor, I welcome it. So some people say, let those who can pay and all that. If there is data and we can really do this effectively without, overburdening the poor and the vulnerable, then I am all for it. But everything must be informed by the data. Sometimes people speak out of emotions and sentiments.
Right.
Because of one person's experience with a child at maybe prefect or achievement, I say, hey, the policy is bad. Everything must be informed by data. I implore the Secretariat of Free SHS to actually do a research. I'm available. They can contact me. Do a research and use the data to identify the areas that need the review before we can do the review. Because sometimes you may end up reviewing something and incur more cost than in its original state. So every decision for a review must be informed by the data.
Now, I mean, for an intervention such as LEAP, I can certainly understand, but you lump that also with the teacher trainee allowance, for instance, and some might question whether or not they're in the same league and that should be maintained, the trainee allowance, for example, and what sort of burden that has on the purse of Ghana.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to protect the teachers and the nurses because they didn't have loans, and most of them, I'm not saying all of them are from poor homes, but if you look at the data very well, if you talk to people, those who go to universities may be well provided than those who are in training and nursing. I may be wrong, but I think that's the scenario that the government was trying to paint, just at least to give them some allowance. But if it is possible to move the allowance to loans so that just as the universities, you get loans and you pay after that.
So that is the sort of review that you would welcome.
Yeah, I'll welcome it. However, I said that everything must be informed by the data. So let's do the research and be informed by the data that if you do the loans, would it impact positively or negatively? If it's about allowances, is it impacting positively or negatively? If it is right now, it's impacting positively, let's leave it. If it's negatively, let's review it. Many people have raised the concern that, the nurses, they will finish school and they will run away from the country, they will go to other countries and work, and the government has already incurred some costs in their training, and instead of serving the country, they leave. That one should be corrected. And so if it is the case, if the data tells us that, yes, more people leave the shores of the country, and therefore there's no need to provide them with allowance, then so be it. So again, I come back to my earlier point that everything must be informed by the data. And during the COVID, Ghana scored among the highest in Africa, in fact, among the highest in the world. There's something we call stringency index, and I think listeners can go to the Johns Hopkins University website and look at the stringency index of countries. Ghana scored among the highest. What is that index? It's the index of protecting Ghanaians against the spread of COVID. The interventions that the government put in place to make sure that Ghanaians were not affected. That's what we call the stringency index, the social protection, the long distances, the lockdown, etc. Now, when you look at all these things, anytime the president came to speak, the famous Fellow Ghanaians series.
That's right. Usually happened around Sundays, 8 p.m.
Yes, Sundays, 8 p.m. Thanks for welcoming me in your homes. Every time the president spoke, he made reference to the data. And I was so happy. And that is why we scored the highest among the highest in Africa and in the world. Anytime the government spoke, he made reference to the data. The data says this. The data says that. The data says this. And so we are releasing the lockdown. We are locking down. We are reopening school. We'll close down schools. Everything was informed by the data. And I think that it's a practice that we must imbibe. Honorable Tony Otinjesi, Dr. Otinjesi, also made a similar point at a forum that I attended with him. He said that most people just speak out of sentiments and emotions. We don't speak to the data. The research departments must be resourced and intensified and bring out the data for reforms to be made around the data. So whether it's free SHS, teacher nursing or teacher training allowance, leave, everything must be informed by the data. Let's really resource our research departments and intensify data collection in this country.
So you say we scored well on that with what is stringency index?
Stringency index, yes. That's Johns Hopkins University.
That's positive. That's positive to hear, because in recent times when we are ranked in certain index, it doesn't go our way. It's not as positive as we would like. Now, something like the recovery of industry. Now, some data here. I want to ask, Doc, if this is something that creditors will also be paying attention to. Ghana's industrial sector continued to struggle in 2023, posting negative year-on-year growth rates for the first 3 quarters of the year at an average of minus 2.9%. So you had within this sector, oil and gas posted an average growth of minus 4%, electricity minus 3.4%, manufacturing 0%, and the construction sector a whopping minus 8%, all within the first 3 quarters of 2023. What does this mean if this negative growth continues? Again, are creditors paying attention to this?
Yes, a negative growth rate signifies contraction. So last time I had this debate with another colleague, he said that when the growth rate is reduced, it means contraction. I said that no. As long as the growth rate is positive, it's still expansion. It is only when the growth rate is negative, as you spelled out. So it means that the industrial sector is contracting, which is not a good sign. A lot should be done to revive the sector, but it is expected. It is part of the sacrifice that you mentioned. The IMF program usually has its main objective of balance of payment support and macroeconomic stability. And anytime you are talking about balance of payment support and macroeconomic stability, it has little to do with the GDP growth. It has more to do with the exchange rate stability, inflation stability, or stability of prices, and then also the balance of payment support. As you have more reserves, you build up reserves. So if a program is bringing down your inflation, a program is stabilizing your cedi, a program is building reserves at the Bank of Ghana, then that IMF program is seen to be successful. But we know that these stability issues, the price for it is GDP growth. And I think I wasn't shy of it. I made it in my earlier point that most countries that do macroeconomic stability plus GDP, their growth rates were always around 1%, 1.5%. So Ghana, I think everything is happening at the same time against GDP. First, it was GDP. Now, they're going to do the external one. And even the external is not going to be have so much effect on our industry. But the DDEP obviously had impact on the industry's investments, because then you have little money to invest because of the DDEP. And it was expected. And so, yes, Ellen, the negative growth rates are not good signs, but they were expected because of the IMF program, which comes with sacrificing GDP. And so the external creditors will not be too bothered, even though it's a negative side, but they will not be too bothered about it, because the main focus of the IMF program is stability and balance of payment support. And are we achieving it? Yes, we are achieving it, and even beyond, because GDP growth has gone beyond that. Except that within the GDP, the industrial sector is suffering. So it is incumbent on the government now to sit down with the industrial players and assess what the problem is. Let's ascertain what the problem is and then find solutions to it. It must be resolved. It shouldn't be something that the government should fold its arms and close its eyes on. They should resolve it. But as to whether it will impact negatively on the external debt relief, I don't think so.
Okay, now, bringing in the Bank of Ghana quickly into the equation, because under the government's debt restructuring program, the Bank of Ghana, we know, wrote off some 48 billion Ghana cedis owed to it by the central government. And this was a debt that was part of some 77 billion cedis that had been accumulated by the government, again, from the central bank. How instrumental would the Bank of Ghana be this year? In fact, they're under some constraints, if I'm not wrong, imposed upon them by the IMF. What will be their critical role this year in ensuring that we are cushioned against future impacts should that arise?
Okay, so let's start the history. 2002 coming, we have not been able to raise bonds from the Eurobond market, and so the only option was to look internally for funding. One of the major...
Sorry, Doc, you meant 2022. I think you might have said 2002.
22, yeah.
That's
January
right.
Coming, 22,
right.
Yeah. And so the government had to look within for funding, for financing its budget. So the Bank of Ghana, as the lender of last resort, steps in. Remember that the central bank is a bank of the government, and the government is the only customer of the central bank. So if the customer needs help, even if it's overdraft, the central bank must step in to provide funding. So they did what we call the quantitative easing through printing and through bonds.
Right.
And part of the bonds, it means the government owes the central bank. Now, after providing this support, there comes in an IMF program, a prerequisite of which is debt restructuring. And then the government goes back to the central bank and says, look, I know I borrowed from you, but we are doing a debt restructuring. You must help me out.
I know I've gone way over the threshold that I myself has set in order to check myself. I've gone way over, but I'm back again.
I'm back again for help. We are all in normal, not in normal terms. Burden share. So what part of the burden are you going to share with me? Bank of Ghana says, okay, then I think a haircut will be fine. You owe me this amount, but don't pay 48 billion. That's in simple terms. You don't have to pay 48 billion so that you can get some relief in terms of interest payment or debt service burden on your revenue. And then so the Bank of Ghana was strategically at a point where they provided some relief bailout of the government. And so we all know how it resulted to a loss, and we must be clear on our minds that that loss was just an accounting principle. It wasn't that somebody had gone to spend some money, because that's the impression created out there that Bank of Ghana had made loss of 60 billion, means that they have chopped money 60 billion. No. The loss was as a result of assets being lower than liabilities. The loss came because of the haircut, and the haircut reduced their assets.
Well, Doc, just to put this in maybe simple terms, and I'm no economist, but an economist friend put it this way, and you can correct myself and said economist if we've gotten it wrong. He said that, think of it in this way. We're told that the Bank of Ghana owes or 60 million or so. 60 billion Ghana cedis. A loss of 60 billion Ghana cedis. So that if everybody that the Bank of Ghana or has money with the Bank of Ghana ended up going all at once, which of course is unlikely, but for just painting a scenario, if everybody went, I want my money from the Bank of Ghana, they'd have to find that 60 billion Ghana cedis from somewhere. They'd be lacking. They wouldn't have that money to provide.
Yeah, that's why I said there's only one customer. And so whenever we are talking about banking laws, there's a question I read in one of the economist articles that, can a central bank make a loss? And the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
It's yes in terms of technical terms. When your assets are lower than your liabilities, it's a loss.
Okay.
But no in terms of operational sense.
Right.
So
right.
There's only one customer of the central bank, which is the government, in terms of deposits and all that. That is why when a commercial bank makes a loss, what the scenario you painted applies, because when all customers, it becomes insolvent. It means that when all customers go at once for their money, they don't get the money for them.
Got it.
But this does not apply to a central bank.
Okay, who has one customer.
Yes. So the loss of the central bank did not impair its operation. That is the key phrase here.
Okay.
That loss did not impair its operation. What are its operations? Operations of ensuring price stability, supporting the government economic policies, providing finances for the commercial banks, are they able to achieve it? Yes, they are able to achieve it. And the Bank of Ghana has not complained that they are unable to perform their functions. So the Bank of Ghana right now should be applauded. I saw demonstrations up there that the governor should resign, deputy governor.
That's right.
They rather must be promoted. They should be applauded.
You say the Bank of Ghana governor should rather be applauded and promoted.
The governor and the deputies must be applauded for stepping in to help the government, for stepping in to bail out the government, for stepping in to make sure that our lives are still on, for stepping in to make sure that our taps are still flowing, for stepping in to make sure that there's no fuel shortage as it happened in Kenya and other countries and Egypt and other countries. These things were not experienced in the country. That's why
this is due to the Bank of Ghana. You say this is their intervention?
This is due to the Bank of Ghana's intervention from 2022 as I recounted. That's why I wanted to give you the background of their intervention. So it wasn't only this haircut that they received. It was even their previous interventions that they make sure the government doesn't have money. In simple terms, government doesn't have money. I am his bank. So I step in to provide my customer with money. It's just like individuals. If you have money, you go to your bank for overdraft and etc. People have raised questions about the approach. Yes, you can raise questions about the approach. You could have summoned the governor and asked him in Parliament, why did you spend over the 5% of previous year's tax revenue that threshold that, and the governor would have provided answers.
I believe the governor, we're told, was summoned a number of times to answer some of these much needed questions. Again, about going over that threshold and whether or not disregarding that threshold seemingly, as we've seen, is also one of the problems. That if government always knows that there's a last resort, then it doesn't give them that kick up the behind, if you will, pardon my French, that is needed. Because if I can always go over that agreed threshold or that threshold I set for myself, what is the incentive to find more creative ways of raising revenue?
Yes, there is a reason we have that threshold, so that because a greater quantitative easing. I have a friend, Zurich, the CEO of Ghana Tourism Authority. He says that we should just print and grow the economy. So we always argue, and I tell him that there's a limit.
That's right.
We can go.
That's right.
And that as a country we have agreed on the limit.
That's right.
But this clause, there's a clause in that law that it can be suspended in times of difficulties.
Is there a need, Dr. Sarkodie, then for that limit at all? If we're always relying on that clause to bypass it, and if we say, well, we can bypass it, there's a clause.
Yeah, in the time past, we have even done 0% central bank financing before.
That's right.
We've done 0% financing. That's why
right.
I'm saying that, yes, the law is necessary. We need to abide by it. But this same law, there's a clause in it that it can be suspended in times of difficulties, and it was suspended. Other people think that the governor should have just written a letter. I don't know if that letter was written. I'm not privy to these parliamentary proceedings and all these laws. So that's why I'm speaking strictly to the economics of it.
Sure.
So if the government, governor, they didn't write a letter or he wrote a letter, he didn't seek permission or sought permission, the bottom line is that the governor stepped in to provide liquidity support for the government to make sure that our lights were kept on, water flew, fuel were adequate, food, there was no food shortage, etc. Everything was running in the economy. Everything was kept normal. And in that context, we must rather applaud the governor and the deputy governor for coming in to save the country. That one, I can always defend it, and many economists have defended it, that what the governor did was right, and it was the right thing to do. And instead of bastardizing them, we should rather praise them for their bold decisions. Have they made a loss? Yes.
That's
right. Did they go over their law? Perhaps. But what was the
Dr. Sarkodie, you said, did they go over? Perhaps they went over.
Yes, but I'm saying that this interpretation, this law and constitutions, you can call the lawyers and they do interpret
Absolutely.
it. But as an economist, I wouldn't speak as a lawyer here.
Sure.
But I'm saying that the central bank is there for the government to seek bailout. The government was having liquidity crisis. The central bank stepped in to provide liquidity support. Within the context of economic discussion, it was the right thing to do, and they must be applauded for doing the right thing.
All right, Doc, time check. It is some 3 minutes past the hour of 9. You're still live here on 3FM Sunrise on 3FM 92.7. We're talking money as we're told that our restructuring of external debts could be coming to a close. Dr. Edu Owusu-Sarkodie is a development economist at the University of Ghana, speaking to us about matters arising. Now, when we talk about restructuring of debts, Doc, before we wrap up on this conversation, practically for the layman, for those of us who are not economists, what does that look like? I believe that's different from, let's say, a debt forgiveness. Does a restructuring mean a longer term of the loan, a reduction in the interest? What does that look like for a country like Ghana with our bilateral creditors?
Exactly as you said. So the structure of a debt is about the amount you borrowed, the interest you pay on it, and the maturity period. All right. Now, when you want to restructure, it means you want to change the structure. You want to change the principal. You want to change the interest. You want to change the maturity period. And of course, in changing it, you, the proposer, the one proposing it, you wouldn't want to change it for it to affect you negatively. You want it to be changed for better terms. So what you do is that you raise or you bring in new bonds for old ones, but the new ones are coming to replace the old ones with favorable terms to you, the debtor, not the creditor. So that's why you make the proposal and they have to accept. That's what it was done at the domestic fund. For the external level, it's similar. You are calling for a reduction in the principal payment, a deferment in the payment. You are calling for a reduction in the interest payment or a reduction in the interest payment. And these four pillars can all be touched. And so we are asking the external creditors to either defer the principal payment, or reduce the principal payment, which we call the haircut, defer the interest payment, or reduce the interest payment, which is also another haircut. Because haircut is when the face value is lower than the official value.
Right.
And so, yeah, we are going to look for different terms. We are going to negotiate different terms with respect to principal payments, principal amount, interest payment, and the interest amount. And when we are successful, we are looking for a savings of about 5 billion at the first instance, and then before we go to the multilaterals and then the commercials.
And I think we've seen that in agreements, for example, between, say, China and Zambia. They are also going through some debt restructuring. Although I believe in Zambia, over 17% of their debt comes from China, whereas in Ghana, I believe it's only 3%. So very different circumstances, if we will. But some very interesting restructuring going on in Zambia. Not sure if that's one we would like to see replicated in Ghana. But again, very different circumstances.
Yes, it's very different. Ghana is quite, we have some strategic positioning in the geopolitical environment. Ghana is being loved. I think even the IMF boss didn't hide from this fact that Ghana is a darling boy.
That's right.
It's being loved by the West, by the G20. That is why that framework is even available for us to restructure our debts and IMF. We even had the IMF program, as the finance minister would say, on record time. Some countries went before us and we secured our...
That's right. I believe within some 5 months we had reached a staff level agreement.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we seem to have some favor in the eyes of these G20, and I think it's a plus for us. Many investors want to come to Ghana. They have always cited our political stability. Ghanaians, we love our peace. Ghana is the second most peaceful country in Africa. We've always been between second and fourth most peaceful country in Africa.
Are these updated, Doc? Are these updated stats? Where are these stats from?
No, you can just check them online. I mean, there are countries that we are rubbing shoulders with in terms of peace. Seychelles, Mauritius, and then Botswana.
I was hoping you'd point to something specific I too could verify.
Well, I'll give you the
Sure,
website, and then you
sure,
go and check.
sure.
But this one everybody knows. Even President Mahama mentioned it last time in his speech. So Ghana is being loved because of our peace, because of our political stability. This year will be our 9th time we go to the polls in the Fourth Republic. We've had closely contested elections, yet little violence, but at least on the whole, Ghanaians can be proud. My colleagues at GIPC tells me that many investors want to come to Ghana because of our stability, the love that we have for each other. So these are all positive things that we should be proud of as Ghanaians. You mentioned earlier that we usually talk about negative things, but when there are positive things, they don't get news headlines. So
that's right.
These are positive things. In fact, the credit rating agencies, anytime they even downgraded us, they made reference to our political stability, the democracy, the rule of law. They always made reference to that. Another positive thing that we should be proud of now is today I'm giving you facts. It is the Human Development Index.
Right.
This index is being calculated using education, health, and income as indicators. Ghana has moved up 4 places in the world, and I think about 8 places in Africa. We used to be around 144, now we are 140. In West Africa, we are second to Cape Verde. So Ghana is only second to Cape Verde in terms of Human Development Index. And this is about development at the human level, at the micro level. And these are all positive things that we should be proud of as Ghanaians. And we must amplify the positives, not always talk about negatives.
Certainly,
and so, yes, Ghana is doing well. And so in the eyes of the creditors, in the eyes of these people, they look at all these, the IMF and the World Bank. That's why I said we should always allow the data to speak.
Right.
The IMF and the World Bank and these external creditors, they have data in front of them all the time. So they click Ghana, they see life expectancy at death, they see maternal mortality, they see infant mortality, they see Human Development Index, they see the stringency index, they see everything, the political stability score, democracy, they see all the scores, and they say that, look, yes, they have a liquidity crisis, but look at the other scores. All the other scores are positive. And so let's help them. That is why they are so intentional about this country. And I think it's a plus, and we thank God for the mercies He has shown us.
I don't disagree with that at all, Doc. It's just when you sit in this chair, you put the headphones on, turn on the microphone, and open up the phone lines. The reality sometimes does not reflect the positivity that we wish to amplify. I would love to sit here in the mornings and rattle off some great things that are happening, and great things are happening, but two things can be true at the same time. We're doing well in certain areas, but the suffering is still immense in certain areas. For certain citizens, it hasn't been a good 2022. Last year was certainly very turbulent. We're looking to 2024 for things to turn around. Now, with the raft of measures that government put in place, there's a saying that I quite like. Present pains lead to permanent gains. And I think that's what Ghanaians are hoping for, that some of the strife and suffering that we've been made to go through, very painful DDEP amongst others, we're hoping that means more positive or more positivity financially for the year 2024. We're told that 850,000 Ghanaians were plunged into poverty due to inflation and other factors, and those are stats that we cannot ignore. This is also the reality on the ground.
Yes, we cannot ignore them, but we also should not forget about the global context. Sometimes when you make reference to the war, you make reference to the U.S. Fed rate. Some people think that it's more political, but it's a global economic outlook that we must consider. Many countries have experienced the highest inflation in 40 years, as Japan, as South Korea, and the rest. And so, yes, Ghana has its own internal problems. Nobody has run away from it. But we must also not lose sight of the fact that there's a global economic outlook which is not positive, and that is impacting on many economies. Last year, one of my colleagues at the department did a research, and he said 28% of the city depreciation could be attributed to the war.
28%?
Yes, of the city depreciation of last year alone could be attributed to the war. Is he right? Yes. Is the war the only problem? No. But can we ignore it? No, we cannot ignore it. That's the point I always want to make. We should not ignore the impact of COVID, and we should not ignore the impact of the war. My friends in the U.S. have all attributed to the increase in fuel price and food prices to the world. It has disrupted global supply chain. Go to Germany. We cannot ignore that. Yes, we have our own internal problems, but there's a global wind
that definitely
blowing.
make our situation even worse. So that for us, there is no cushioning.
Yes.
There is no
cushioning.
cushioning.
The word that IMF used, they said it has exacerbated.
Exactly.
That's the word they use. So it means that you are having your own internal problems, and the global wind blew and has deepened your woes.
That's right.
And that must be established as a fact. And we shouldn't run away from responsibility as Ghanaians and as economists. We must all rally together around the government and then find solutions to the problem, both internal problems and external problems. And so, yes, we Ghanaians, we all want the best for ourselves. I'm a lecturer at the University of Ghana. Do you think that if I wasn't paying taxes, I wouldn't be happy? I'll be happy. I pay more than 2,000 in terms of taxes. If there was zero tax, I would have put that money in my pocket and spend it somewhere. And so if I go to the market, if I go to buy fuel and it's now 6 cedis or 5 cedis, I'll be happy.
Absolutely.
If I take the trotto, I take Uber and it's 20 cedis or 10 cedis, I'll be happy. So yes, we are all in it together and we must find solutions to it. Now let me end on this note. I think that God in his wisdom has blessed this country with natural resources.
That's right.
There is no natural resource that you can't find in this country. I stand to be corrected. Almost all the natural resources, aluminium, manganese, oil, gas, today is lithium. We've been told that the crude oil would start finishing around from 2035. So you see what God did for Ghana. He knew that if he gives us another oil well, it may not be well demanded by the global market. Why? Because the whole world is moving from fossil fuels to clean energy. So in his wisdom, he says that, okay, if your oil gets finished, I have a substitute for you. I'm giving you lithium, which is for clean energy. And what have we done as Ghanaians? We have signed the same concessional contract as before. In my view, we are not earning enough from the natural resource. I think we should all sit up. We should sit around the table and decide for ourselves what is good for us as Ghanaians, and then make sure that we get the full benefit of the natural resource. Because if you ask me where we are going to get the money to fully transform our economy, I would say the natural resource. Why? Because in the natural resource alone, the profit, the economic rent, this is how economists calculate profit because of opportunity cost. The economic profit around the natural resource alone is around $5 billion a year.
Right.
I repeat, around $5 billion a year. So if Ghana is the first producer is the number one producer of gold in Africa, and now we are going to add lithium, and you add crude oil, together it will be, this year, the value will be around $20 billion. And even if you have about 40% or half of this $20 billion, that's about $10 billion. Multiplied by the exchange rate, you're talking about 120 billion cedis. That can help revive this economy. And so I want to advocate and recommend to policymakers and to the media that we must start singing the songs about the what do you call it, the natural resource. Because as I sit here as an economist, I do not see from any other place where we are going to get enough resources to fully transform our economies into a first-class economy. The only resource I see is a natural resource. We must sign good contracts. We must make sure that we get the local manufacturing or in the industries to run so that we can add value to our natural resource and then fully benefit from what God has bestowed onto us. This one, we can't blame God again because he has given us all that we need, including manpower, including brains. Ghanaians are so brainy. I've had the opportunity to travel outside. We are so brainy. We are always first in class.
That's right.
And so what should God do for us again?
I think one might add, Dr. Sarko, they're also plugging the loopholes, that even when we're raking in good money from our natural resources, plugging in the holes where we see money seep out due to corruption, irregularities, and just simple human error that could be avoided. That's another
100%,
angle.
100%. Yes, I agree with you. It's the reason I support digitization fully, because it is one of the effective ways of checking these loopholes and all that. Because if you ask somebody to go and collect revenue, and it's physical cash, the person may embezzle some. But
that's right.
If it's electronic, it may check these things, even though it will not eradicate it, but at least we will have some manageable, rate. So yes, we must check all these leakages and loopholes within the system.
Right.
Ghanaians are not many. We are just about 33 million. If you put Lagos and Abuja together, that's about Ghana.
That's right.
And so we should be rich by now. Resource-rich countries, go to them. Go to the resource-rich countries. Ask Qatar, ask Saudi Arabia, ask Norway. Go to come to Africa. Go to Equatorial Guinea. Go to Botswana. In Botswana, I think I've heard, I've not checked, but education is free up to the university. I have to check it. But it can be true. Go to Libya. God has given us all of these, and we are still begging. And I think that we should really focus on the natural resource and see how we can restructure things, restructure the contract, restructure the whole system around the natural resource, so we can get benefit from it. You can't be the number one producer of gold in Africa and be begging.
Absolutely.
You can't be the number one producer of gold in Africa. And now you're talking about 3 billion cedis are used to finance free SHS. I have always said that there's enough money in the natural resource. So we should not even be concerned about how much money the government spends on free SHS. I'm saying that we can do better.
Absolutely.
There's enough money that the government can get and even make universities free, even if it's not 100% free, maybe to some extent, because there's money in the natural resource. And we have seen the effect of this in resource-rich countries.
That's right.
In UAE, they are giving people free money for even marrying. Because they have so much money, they don't even know how to use the money for. We are here. We have iron ore, aluminium, manganese, crude oil, gas, gold, lithium. And we are not seeing, someone said we are not seeing top.
We're not seeing top.
So we should see top. I don't want any political party to take this personal, because this problem has been with us for centuries. Centuries. And we must wake up as Ghanaians. I can see, actually, Ellen, I see the wind blowing in Africa political leadership. I've seen leaders rising up in Tanzania. Makafoli, he died, but the successor is also rising up. I've seen the rising up of a political leader. In fact,
Zimbabwe in Tanzania,
today.
We've got a female president, Salma.
Yes,
and she's doing some great things, taking some very bold steps in Tanzania.
Sure. In Zimbabwe, the agriculture sector is one of the best in Africa today because of the leader. You go to you go to Botswana, their leader is helping them.
That's
right. You come to even Kenya, our peers. Kenya, the Ruto, that's his name,
Yes.
He's been signing serious contracts with foreign investors.
That's right.
And I think we should wake up and be part of this renaissance in Africa, and then get the best for ourselves, because Ghana has everything to be a rich country, to be a first-class country. We have everything to be a first-class country.
Dr. Sarkodie, thank you so much for your time this morning. Certainly a very fruitful conversation, and I hope we can expand on some of these themes further. We'll be looking towards the end of February, although you say it's all about the negotiations. But of course, our eyes are firmly on this debt restructuring with our external creditors, so we can boost the economy, boost the city, and find a way out of our woes in 2024. Thank you again for your time.
You're welcome.
Again, that was Dr. Owusu Sarkodie, a development economist at the University of Ghana, talking to us about our debt restructuring with external creditors, which we're told is going in the right direction. Well, for you and I, what does that mean? A strengthening of the city, a strengthening of our pockets. Do, again, connect with us on our socials. Let's hear from you. What are your thoughts on this matter? We'll open up the phone lines very shortly, of course, so that you too can weigh in on a number of the issues that we have discussed this morning.
3 FM Sunrise.